Okay, good evening, everybody. Charlene, do you want to kind of pick up some kind of introduction to open the meeting, or are you happy for me to just go?
Yeah, I just want to quickly just say thank you to all the presidents and people who have joined us, and especially thank you to Rita, who's on screen there. Rita Ackerman will be our SAAF National Safeguarding Officer, so she will oversee the Federation safeguarding. From the Exco, we've got Helen Thrush and we've got Fiona Ross. Fiona Ross is also here as a provincial president. But welcome to everybody, and I hope it's going to be a good session. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, me too. You're welcome. Good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so the reason that we need to kind of talk to all the provincial heads as we make the decision to move down the road of safeguarding is that it's important that as this rollout starts taking place, that we have buy-in at really all the levels. And so really from a Q&A understanding perspective, this is almost the first step, and there will be a second one, which I'll talk into just now. But obviously we have dealt with Charlene to get us to this point. And so the next step is to kind of look at how we move forward. And so I know that there's very many people that have worked in the equestrian space for very many years. And so often the question that tees off this whole conversation is why now? Like, why all of a sudden are we all of a sudden within sports, internationally, within schools? Why is there this massive focus on safeguarding all of a sudden? And so to that end, I think we need to kind of clear that up. I don't want to do a history lesson, but I do think it's important that we understand why we've got to where we are, and then, really open the door in terms of, now that we know where we are, where we're going. So how we've got to where we are is in 2016 at the Olympics, at the last Olympics, there was quite a few allegations that were made by athletes against coaches, and that happened in 2016, which was in 2015 UNICEF put together what was called the 2030 agenda, which essentially was a draft in terms of how we reduce crimes against women and children by the time we get to 2030. Then 2016 happened with all of the allegations. Then in 2017, there was an organization called MINEPS. MINEPS is an acronym. It stands for the Ministers of Physical Education and Sport. And MINEPS meet every 2 years. In 2017, they met in Russia, back when we all didn't, and I'm not going to get to that, but they met in a city called Kazan, and something called the Kazan Action Plan was drafted in 2017. And 116 countries, including South Africa, were signatories to that Kazan Action Plan. Now, the Kazan Action Plan really had three main takeaways, which we need to be aware of as DSOs, as provincial presidents, etc., etc. So the three main takeaways from the Kazan Action Plan was every federation in every country that had signed the Kazan Action Plan needed to develop and adopt a safeguarding policy. So that's the first thing. The second thing that they needed to do is, in accordance with the legislation of their respective country, they needed to ensure that all officials were cleared in accordance with the legislation. And then finally, they needed to do training within each of the federations. And the training was something that was twofold. The first of the training was they needed to train people within their federations that would take responsibility for policing the safeguarding policy and making sure that the safeguarding policy was being enacted. And the second was a lower level safeguarding awareness certificate that every person working in the sport needed to be aware of what safeguarding is. Now, very often people say, well, listen, we know what safeguarding is. We've made our people safe. We've made our athletes safe for a long time. But I think it's important to understand that there is, in this conversation, a different definition between the definition of safety and the definition of safeguarding. So the safety, and I get a bit lost at this stage very often when speaking to federations, and certainly when I'm talking into sports that I don't have that much knowledge about. But the safety is about how we protect athletes from the environment of the sport. So, if I think to where I've seen, people running around and on horses and doing show jumping and that kind of thing, I would believe that as a safety mechanism, you wouldn't be able to compete, for example, without a helmet. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be a safety mechanism. And I'm sure there are many other safety mechanisms that are in place, and you would obviously be far more aware of those because you have a technical knowledge of your respective sports. Safeguarding is something a little different. Safeguarding kind of opens its face to the point where we go, when we have an athlete, that athlete needs to learn the code and the technicalities of that code, then another person needs to talk to that athlete. So essentially a relationship needs to develop. Now, all too often, that relationship has the ability to become toxic or to become inappropriate. And so safeguarding is the creation of mechanisms to ensure that when those relationships happen, whether they're happening between coach and athlete, whether they're happening between athlete and athlete, whether they're happening between administrator and athlete, coach and administrator, technical official, chaperone, doctor, physiotherapist, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we need to create a place where, because our sport forces human beings to come into contact with each other, we need to ensure that as a result of that contact, they're not placed at risk. And that's safeguarding versus safety. So, as I said, in 2017, the Kazan Action Plan was drafted. In 2018, we, as the Guardian, hosted the first safeguarding conference in Africa. It happened in Sandton in Joburg. And it was interesting because the number of people that we co-hosted it, but the number of people that attended from all over the world was really amazing. From Australia, England, all over Europe, America, quite many countries in Africa, because it was something that was so new. And so in 2018, that happened in 2018, the conference. 2019, the world really needed to kind of get away where we draw a line to kind of go, this is the criteria that all sports are going to need to meet, because when you've got countries that are less first world, their legislation tends to be maybe a little less effective, or their law enforcement tends to be a little less effective than first world countries. And so to that end, there needed to be a standard. So in 2019, there was a meeting in Trinidad. We were very fortunate to be invited and kind of talk into that and assist in the development of those structures. But whilst in Trinidad, the likes of UNICEF was there, International Olympic Committee, UNESCO, the International Olympic Committee, Commonwealth Games, FIFA were there, strangely enough. But yeah, so those organizations, there weren't many of us, maybe 15, 20 of us, that kind of looked at drawing that line. Okay. So that was really in 2019. Additionally, in 2019, SASCOC developed their safeguarding framework, and that was put out to all federations at the end of 2019. 2020, we know what happened. The whole world came to a grinding halt, a handbrake turn on everything. So as we came out of the end of 2020 and athletes were allowed to start training again, obviously we weren't competing, there weren't spectators, but you could start training as long as you were on your own. There was a realization that the Olympics, which was supposed to happen in 2020, got kicked out to 2021. In the kicking out of the Olympics to 2021, obviously sports started opening in January 2021 and December 2020. There was a massive need, a massive rush to get South African sports aligned so that we could compete in Tokyo. And so as the Guardian, because we were really kind of, I suppose, the front of that race, we had very many federations that aligned to us and appointed us as their safeguarding partner. And just because there was so much work to be done, it turned out that we weren't going to get the South African team ready. And so we then partnered with SASCOC just to get the team that was going to Tokyo ready, as opposed to all the federations. And obviously for both Olympic and Para. So we partnered with the SA team that went to both Para and to the Olympics. Sorry, I was something in my eye here. And then coming out of that, we have subsequently partnered with about 25, 30 of South Africa's sporting federations. Um, and 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 we've got to a point where I think we have a model that seems to be very effective when it comes to moving forward and rolling out within the safeguarding space. Now, if we were going to talk about what you needed to have in your federation and really drill down on that, we would literally be here till, I don't know, next week, Tuesday, because safeguarding, for all intents and purposes, is an exceptionally big subject. And what I mean by that is safeguarding starts at the creation of your first policy, which very well may be, I don't know, no cell phones in the change room, whatever it is, and kind of works its way through the implementation of policy, the creation of proactive measures, right through to the point where then we do have transgressions. We need to we need to set up committees and draft the ability to run disciplinary inquiries if there is a failure on someone's behalf to do that safeguarding, right through to the fact that the failure in the safeguarding space may be criminal. And now we need to look at the criminal side, the things like, you know, crime scene management and the collection of evidence and management of witnesses and arresting of suspects and so it just gets huge. So the easiest way for me to do it without, you know, from a consulting perspective, for me to kind of sit in front of the presidents of the provinces and, you know, the person that's going to hold the reins from a national perspective and say, listen, let's get all the blur out the way. Let's make it as simple to understand as possible. And so in doing that, we've coined a phrase called the 4 and 6. And the 4 and 6 is really where the tacky meets the tar, because in as much as at EXCO level, we need to develop policy, and policy would really be the strategic approach, we also need to ensure that everything drilled down in our policy is able to be enacted at grassroots level. So when we're sitting with an EXCO making a call on what a policy should look like, we really do need to be ensuring that down in a development stable somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and nothing, that policy can be being adhered to. Because just writing the rules and not policing them is, I think, a massive trap that South Africa falls into on so many levels. So, and I'm not going to get into South Africa's legislators. Safe to say that South Africa is one of those countries that has extremely poor proactive legislation. We have extremely strong reactive legislation, but we have very, very poor proactive legislation. And to give that context and to understand what I mean by proactive legislation, the example I always use is I have a friend of mine who is a headmaster at a school, and he went a couple of months back, he went to Australia to go visit his son who lives over there. And whilst there, he went to a swimming gala at the school for his granddaughter, to watch his granddaughter. I think she was in grade 2 or 3. So, you know, and he took out his phone to take a photo and a picture of his granddaughter to swimming in the race. And his words to me were, Mark, I nearly got lynched by all the parents. And it's because they've got proactive legislation. You don't take pictures of children. The school has policy that goes, you don't take pictures of children, and it aligns to the legislation. We don't have that. However, we as a sporting country, we are a country that goes, we want to compete on the world stage. And so what I see happening in the landscape that we work in is that I envisage that much of South Africa's proactive legislation will give birth over the next couple of years as a result of sport, because there is so much policy and there is so much drive to get proactive safeguarding right within the sports space that, it makes sense that in time, God willing, our legislation will follow. Okay, so the 4 and 6. What is the 4 and 6, and how does that fit together? And what does that mean for you as the president of a province? What does that mean for the clubs or districts within your province? And how do we kind of take it forward? So what the 4 and 6 is, the 4 are the 4 things that we expect every club in the country to do. And Rita, am I correct in going, you're the person that'll be the national DSO? Okay, so for your sins, the responsibility on your shoulders will be to ensure what I'm going to tell you now about the 4 and 6. But at the end, I'm going to throw you a golden nugget that will show you how to pull it together quite nicely. So don't stress out or have a heart attack before we get to the end. Okay, so what, and the reason I say that is I think that every time I've dealt with somebody that played any role in getting the admin right at the end of COVID so that people could compete, are like at the end, athletes and admin don't mix. It just is what it is. Anyway, all right, so the clubs, what do the clubs need to do? 4 and 6. The first of 4 is every club through their DSO, and I'll get to DSO in a second, but through their DSO needs to sign acceptance of the National Federation's safeguarding policy. So I'm not sure if we've started going down the road as yet, but I know that it is something that we're in talks with, because we're working with a lot of the federations. So I'm not sure where we are with SAF, but we will, in conjunction with Exco and National, ensure that there is a safeguarding policy, and that policy is accepted by the DSO at every single club. The policy document that we need to draft, very often I see federations turning to someone who may have a legal background, turning to an attorney to get that right. Our experience is that doesn't work that well, very simply because the nature or culture of an attorney is to ensure that the document that they draft aligns to the best interest of whoever's paying the fee. And the challenge here is that we don't need this policy to protect the federation. We need it to protect the children or the vulnerable athletes. So we need to make sure that whoever talks into that policy has an understanding of how to protect proactively vulnerable athletes. So that's the first part in terms of policy. The second is a DSO, a designated safeguarding officer. We will have a DSO from what I can see at national level. Generally, federations, depending on the size, will have DSOs at provincial levels. If there's districts, sometimes even a DSO at district level, but certainly a DSO at club level. That is kind of the most important. For all intents and purposes, if you do have a DSO at national level, the national DSO is there to ensure that the provinces are doing what they should do. The provinces are there to make sure the districts are doing what they should do. The districts are there to make sure the club is doing it. And that is really where it all happens, because it's getting it wrong at club level that places the athlete, the club, the federation, and all these other things at massive, massive risk. So getting it right at club level is far more important than getting it right at national level. And the national kind of just downward pressure is there to hopefully push it and drive it at club level. Okay, so that's the second thing, is the DSO, or designated safeguarding officer. It is either a 3-evening or 2-day course. It is a SASCOC accredited course, and we will run that with you. When I say 2 days, sometimes with federations, we'll run it on a Saturday and a Sunday from 8 until 4:30 on both days. And then there's an exam that you need to write and pass. Or we can do it over 3 evenings during the week if the weekends are challenging, and then it's kind of from 5 until 9 on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, or whatever we agree to. So that's the DSO, or designated safeguarding officer. That is the second thing of the 4 that every club needs to address. The third is that we need to create an environment within the club that any athlete, coach, parent, groom, technical official, doesn't matter, anybody, has the ability to report anonymously on any challenge that they may be facing. So almost a whistleblowing structure. As the Guardian, we have chatted with SAF that, we have an anonymous reporting app. It is very easy to use. I'm not going to unpack the nuts and bolts of how it all fits together. Safe to say that it is just a something that everybody would just, we would give them the communication on where to access it on the Play Store or on the App Store, depending if they had an iPhone or an Android, and they would just download it. I'm not going to go much more into it, but it's just safe to say that we do have that as a solution. And then the final thing of the 4 is communication. We need to ensure that we don't fall into the trap of the past, where we develop the safeguarding policy and we get it all nice. It gets put in some expensive lever arch file on the secretary's office in the top shelf, and no one knows about it. We literally need to take the safeguarding policy. We need to put it on our website. We need to make all the policies available to anybody who want them. We've got a communication pack that the clubs can get from us, which would be everything from putting up posters in the change rooms saying what the change room policies are, right through to posters around who is the DSO, how do we access the DSO, how do we access the anonymous reporting app, what is the safeguarding policy. So instead of having this 100-page document dropped in every club, we've got this A3 poster that is aesthetically pleasing, which we can put up in the club, and we can say, as SAF, we have zero tolerance for this and this and this and this and this, and we literally list those things. But yeah, we can talk into the poster packs if there's questions on that just now. So the 4 and 6, to recap the 4, policy manual, DSO, anonymous reporting, and communication of all of this. So those 4 things need to be done at every club. The 6 is what we expect every person, either working as a volunteer or remunerated, anywhere in the federation that plays any part in the assisting of the ongoing of the federation. So that would be everybody from the club chairperson right through to the coaches. If there is a pub, the person that works behind the pub, it doesn't matter. Anybody engaging with the clubs and federations, right? Now, what we expect from them is 6 things. The first 3 are just straight South African legislation, and that is clearances against the Sex Offenders Register, the Child Protection Register, and a criminal check. Those 3 checks we will expect to be done by everybody. Please know that as I'm talking through this, if there are questions on how we get these things done, I will 100% answer those questions at the end, because there's not a case of me coming in here on an ARB Wednesday night, dropping this bomb on you and walking away, because as a result of the partnership, we're 100% here to move forward with this, and we've done this in many federations, some much bigger than SAF and some smaller than SAF. So we can talk about the logistics just now. But there's clearances need to be done by everybody. Those clearances tell me that you've never been caught, not that you've never done anything wrong. And so we expect everybody to sign a DOGS, or Declaration of Good Standing, to say that they've never been asked to leave any institution or ever chosen to leave any institution under any suspicious circumstances. So that's their Declaration of Good Standing, or DOGS. Then we want them to sign a code of ethics. There is an ethical standard to being part of the sport, and we really do need people to sign that, to sign that code of ethics. And then the final is the SAC, or Safeguarding Awareness Certificate. It is you could really do it in an hour and a half or 2 hours. It has a little multiple choice exam at the end, and everybody needs to pass it. It goes all the way back to the Kazan action plan, where I said that we needed to tell everybody what safeguarding is. It drills into the SASCOC policy. It unquestionably will be in the SAF policy, because they just need to align from SASCOC to SAF. And so everybody's going to have to do that SAC. So to recap on the 6, there is the 3 clearances, being Sexual Offenders Register, Child Protection Register, and Crim Check. Then your Declaration of Good Standing, or DOGS. Then your COE, or Code of Ethics. And then your SAC, or Safeguarding Awareness Certificate. Now, when one considers all of that needs to happen in every club with every coach, it seems quite daunting in terms of how we move forward with that. And so what we've needed to do as the Guardian is we've created a piece of software which SAF will definitely go onto. And what that does is this is the golden nugget, Rita, that we chatted about earlier. So it's a safeguarding admin management tool. And the reason that it is there is very simply to get this admin in place. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly because I've got a little PowerPoint that I'd like to show you just so you can understand what safeguard is, because safeguard really kind of pulls it together. It really is the DNA that kind of makes it all work and helps it fit together. Okay, hold on. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, it's just 11.
Yes.
Thank you. It's just 11 slides, so it's not a massive. We're almost done. Okay, so how does Safeguard work? So this is the brand Safeguard. So how does Safeguard work? Very quickly. So Safeguard is a safeguarding administration management system. Safeguard allows the district, province, and national structure to easily identify proactive safeguarding challenges which may be in play, which may place the federation at risk. So what I mean by that is the federation can be at risk if we don't get the proactive stuff right. Now, if I can give you an example, is that if we sit in a situation, let's just play out something horrific. God forbid a child is sexually assaulted or raped in a club somewhere in South Africa. Let's just say that is the situation that plays out. And yes, the perpetrator, hopefully will be arrested and end up in jail for a very long time. And we all hope that that definitely happens. However, there is a civil risk that the Federation sits with, because SASCOC last year drafted what's called a policy framework saying that all federations needed to get safeguarding policy in place. Well, we're now doing that. Once the safeguarding policy is in place, the safeguarding policy calls for many things, but also calls for the 4 and 6 to be put in place. Now, if that happened and we had taken all the safeguarding measures necessary to mitigate it, and it still happened, we wouldn't be at risk. However, if we had put a policy in place that said, just as an example, everyone must be cleared against the sex offenders register, and then we didn't take the necessary steps to ensure that everybody was actually cleared against the safeguarding register, the sexual offences register, and then somebody who had a previous conviction actually assaulted the child, the question that gets asked by court of the Federation is, did you have a policy? Yes. Did you manage it? No. Okay, well, then it's your failure of duty of care that caused this to happen. And it's in that space that the Federation is at massive risk. And so that's why getting this admin and this proactive side correct is extremely important. So that is what Safeguard is. Then how does it work? So coming out of this, and Jared, I think Jared would work. Jared's on this presentation. He is the sport admin coordinator for the Guardian. So he works with all the federations, assisting in terms of moving forward and getting their proactive stuff sorted out. So what Jared would need from, I'm not sure if it's going to be from the National DSO, if it's going to be from Charlene, kind of who it's going to be. But what Jared is going to need to set up your safeguard structure is he's going to need to set up the profile. He's going to need, sorry, I need to make this a little bit bigger because I can't see what the hell is happening here. There we go. No, hold on. Really? There we go. So we need to have this organogram. It doesn't have to be set up as this organogram, but we're going to need to know National Federation, very simple. Then what is the name of all the provinces? Are they affiliates to the national organization, and do they plug into the national office? If they do, how are we going to deal with them on Safeguard? Then under the provinces, do all of the provinces have districts? Those that do, what is the names of those districts? And then under the districts or under the province, depending on how many clubs I suppose there are in each province, what are the names, of each of those clubs? Additionally, to set this structure up on Safeguard, the other thing that Jared is going to need is he's going to need the name of the prospective DSO for each club. So if we go back to the last slide and we look at these clubs over here that will stretch across under all the districts and all the provinces, who is going to be the prospective DSO? If the DSO hasn't been appointed, then off the bat, we will just make it the club chairperson, and they will stand in until the DSO is appointed. It's also important to remember that a DSO can be appointed even if they haven't done their training. So we would say, as an example, Mark is the DSO for Durban Equestrian as an example, but we know that he's going to do his DSO course only next month. It's fine. He's in place. He's on safeguard. The expectation of what he needs to do isn't there, but at least in the system, we've got the right person in there. Another thing that comes up at this point is a question from club chairpersons going, listen, we've got these people in our club, but I'm not quite sure who would be the right person to be appointed as a DSO within the club. So we have a little video that we can disseminate amongst all the club chairpersons, and really it talks into what type of person you should choose when choosing your DSO. And if I can give you guys, as the provincial heads and the national head, kind of the answer, it's very, very simple. There's really two criteria that we want to look at. Number one is we want to make sure that the person is not conflict adverse. So we can't have someone who, realizes that someone is on the phone in the change room, but they're just too conflict adverse to go and talk to the person about the fact that they're dropping the ball. And the second thing is, which isn't as important, but it tends to be better to have someone who is a little more mature. If you've got someone in your sport that has been doing the sport for 30, 40 years, the likelihood that they're just going to have their nose out of joint when some 22 or 23-year-old is telling them what they can and can't do. But that's not to say that we haven't got DSOs that are younger and aren't very effective. So, but just rule of thumb, that just does tend to work better. But we have a little video. If the club chairpersons would like to have a look at it, we can share the link on WhatsApp through the provincial presidents, and they can share it to all of their clubs and kind of get those names in. Then the DSO information that we need, we're going to need the person's full name and surname. We're going to need their email address, their cell phone number, and their ID number. The reason for that is so that we can populate the back end of Safeguard. There is a T's and C's that is signed between us and SAEF, which aligns and ensures POPI allegiance. So any information you would share with SAEF as a result of your connection to SAEF would need to protect that in alignment with POPI. And so to that end, because we now have the T's and C's and we have everything signed up with SAEF, it would 100% align to all of that. So there would be no sharing of that information. And then once this structure is set up, which will happen fairly quickly, depending on how easy it is to access all of this information, we would then look at kind of getting DSOs trained. Once the DSOs have been appointed and trained, they will be primarily responsible for ensuring that all the documents required to ensure their club meets the 4 are uploaded to Safeguard and verified. So I want to just touch on the two things that are highlighted there, or that are in bold. Primary responsibility. Very often DSOs go, I don't want to be the DSO because if something goes wrong, it's going to be my fault, and then it's not their fault. Their primary responsibility is admin. I want to be very clear that if something, God forbid, does go wrong in a club, that can't be the DSO's fault. It would be much like if you had an armed response through Blue or ADT or one of these service providers and they stole your TV. You couldn't go and ask them to buy you a new TV. They're going to do the best they can to make sure that the premises is safe. But if it does fail, well, then it fails. But we need to make sure that the walls and the burglar guards are as high as possible to mitigate that as far as possible. What does that mean? So each DSO will be able to log into their club profile, and they will upload those 4 documents, namely, as we mentioned earlier, signed acceptance of the Federation safeguarding policy, his or her DSO certificate, the club's communication certificate, which is going, all the posters and everything is in place, and the club's anonymous reporting certificate. Now, the DSO would upload this to their profile, and someone at a level higher than club, so it would need to be the district DSO or the provincial DSO or the national DSO, or obviously as the guardian, we can assist with this as well. But all these documents that get uploaded at club level need to be verified. So when the DSO uploads a DSO certificate, as an example, someone at provincial level is going to need to have a look and go, okay, they didn't upload their water and lights account, they did upload their DSO certificate, and you just click the button to say verified, and then it is verified. As each of these 4 things get verified in their club, so the club then moves more and more towards a higher level of compliance. Having all 4 of these done will mean that the club has achieved 50% compliance. So I'm going to just keep using KZN geography because that's where I'm from. I'm sitting in Durban. So let's just assume we've got Durban Equestrian Club. If I'm the DSO, when I upload a signed acceptance of the policy manual, Durban Equestrian becomes 12.5% compliance. When I upload my DSO certificate, 25%. Once all 4 on, my club as Durban Equestrian is at 50% compliance. Then the DSO will take responsibility to ensure and approve that all coaches, volunteers, etc., upload the 6 to their safeguard profile. So all coaches will have a safeguard login, and they will then have to upload. So what generally happens is they will do their clearances, for example, through us, and we will just automatically upload it to their profile for them. They will do their SAC certificate, and we'll automatically upload it to their safeguard profile for them. But all of these 6 things need to be uploaded to each individual's profile, and those individuals will be connected to the club. So as and when they upload each of these, so if there's one coach and that one coach uploads all 6 of these things, then the personnel part of the club's safeguard profile will be at 100%. If there's 2 coaches and only one has done it, well, then the personnel part will be at 50%. Once every coach, volunteer, admin, etc., has uploaded these docs and they have been approved, now this approval will be done by the DSO. It doesn't have to be done at provincial level. The DSO will just approve these documents, or if we upload them, we will just by default approve them because we would have uploaded them. And as the club slowly gets all of these documents uploaded from each of their coaches, so the other 50% of the club's compliance grows. The club will achieve 100% safeguard compliance when the DSO has uploaded all 4 of the club's documents and they have been approved by province or district or national or guardian or whoever it is, and the coaches, volunteers, admin, etc., have uploaded all 6 of their personal documents, and those have been approved by the DSO. So at that point, they're at 100%. That's when the club reaches 100%. Excuse me. Then the average compliance for all the clubs in a district will define the district compliance. The average compliance for all the districts will define the provincial compliance, and the average compliance for all the provinces will ultimately define the federation's compliance. So if we can look at it something like this, if we had this coach over here who had done 3 of the 6, this coach would be at 50%. If we've got 4 coaches all at different levels of uploading their 6, then those would equate to the personnel level of that club being at 63%. If the admin side was 3 or 4 of them were done, then the admin side would be at 75%, and the average of those 2 would give us the club's compliance. All of the clubs in that district, their average compliance gives us the district compliance. The average of all the districts gives us the provincial compliance. The average of all the provinces gives us the national federation compliance. And interestingly, with this system, the average of all the federations will define how compliant South Africa is. Now, in this system, when we go back to this point over here, the national DSO, when the national DSO logs in, she can see all of the provinces. And as a result of seeing all of the provinces, she could quite easily see which provinces are falling behind. So let's assume she then saw that let's just use this one because it's linked. This province was falling behind. She would then say to this DSO, listen, your province is the one that's holding us all back. This provincial DSO would log in and be able to see the districts. The districts would be able to see the clubs. The clubs would be able to see, obviously, what's going on here. But even from a national level, this national DSO would be able to log into the province and then go into the district and then go into the club and then go. And this national person could really access any of the information all the way through the system. So once all of this is in place, in all honesty, it's at that point that safeguarding begins. It's not at that point that we're finished, because safeguarding is not an action, unfortunately. It's a process. And only those that take responsibility for driving that process will truly safeguard athletes. So that is how we've got to where we are from Kazan Action Plan and SASCOC and that is what we need to do in terms of a 4 and 6. This is the understanding of safeguard and how it all manages. Other than the question, how do we handle rollout, or what are the next steps? Just from a technical understanding of safeguarding and safeguard, and I will handle the rollout and next steps, I'd just like to answer questions now on, are there any technical questions around this whole thing?
Sorry, Mark. It's Jackie.
Yes, Jackie, how can I help?
Staff members of clubs.
Yeah.
Where would they fall in?
Sorry, when or where?
Where?
Where? So they would fall in, if you can still see the screen, they would fall in down here where it says coach.
Okay.
At that level.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, someone's got their hand up. Helen? Helen, your hand's up?
Thanks. I've got a few, so stop me if I'm asking too many and you can respond.
Okay.
I want to know if federations have sort of developed a catch-all clause to include non-affiliated activities and non-affiliated clubs, or do they just simply fall beyond the scope? Because there are a lot of them. Then, and this is just a comment. I think,
okay, yeah. Yeah, carry on.
The Australian example where you spoke about, it's become a culture. There's a culture of awareness of the issues, and that's when it becomes truly effective, regardless of the processes. But that's an observation. I want to know about the cost of clearances. You spoke about the sex offenders, child protection, and the criminal check. And then, is there a way? Is there sort of a proportional issue on the criminal check, because some crimes are more serious than others in terms of what we're trying to achieve here? Also, a suspension period, and the background I'm coming from there in one.
Sorry,
in
just
some
hold
of
on
the
a second,
professions.
Helen. So when you say suspension, are you talking about suspension of the criminal record, or suspension from the federation as a result of the criminal record?
It's that. Yeah, and that's
Okay.
what I was saying is where I come from. If you look at some of the professions where unethical conduct was, historically unethical conduct would result in you being struck off, and that was it. It was an end all thing. Now there's a constitutional imperative that says you serve the time for the crime. How does that work? Because that criminal record sticks.
Yeah.
But so
absolutely.
that's then.
Is that your fault? There's another one. Yeah.
Also to say, please, definitely, can you share the link or the video for clubs? And I want to know if it can be shared extremely widely, like, for example, from the Federation website or their Facebook page. Because I think education is a really important, education and understanding.
Yeah.
And the more you put the tools out there, the more likely that people's got to develop their understanding. Then the last
Absolutely.
one, is there a value that we can sell to individuals, which is sort of a carrot to encourage compliance? And there, will there be a register that the market can look into? So your instructors want to complete their submissions because they can be checked in publicly. If they've got nothing to hide, they can see it as a marketing tool. So anyway, that's sort of a principle. Thanks, that's it.
Okay, so let me answer Helen's questions. She's a whole lot here, so let me just quickly whip through those. Okay, so how do we handle people that are not affiliated? We handle those that are not affiliated. Interestingly, the first and last question aligned. So when we talk about sports that we would consider individual sports, so I would assume that equestrian is that, in my brain, I understand that there are sports that you play as a team on horseback, and I don't even know if those fall into your federation. But certainly if we look at stuff that I understand a bit better, like the difference between golf and tennis versus the likes of rugby and hockey, there is an additional safeguarding measure that one needs to consider in your individual sports. And so to that end, we need to have something that's called a coach's policy. So the coach's policy, there is almost a common man acceptance that if I took my child to a stable and at that stable there was somebody that was coaching and advertising coaching, and that person now that person coaches my child, and then SAEF or KZNEF or whatever the provincial one is called, they run a competition and this coach takes my child to compete. There is a reasonable expectation that because I can compete, or because that coach can allow that athlete to compete under the banner of the National Federation, that the National Federation has done its due diligence. And so to that end, we do need to kind of look at structures. However, what we've done in some of the other federations, like, for example, that haven't got that far down the road yet, so the likes of figure skating, the likes of some of those others, golf is another one, is what we almost do is we advertise as far and wide as possible to say, we list on our website, these are the coaches that SAEF will endorse as a result of the fact that they have completed their SAEF safeguarding and they align to the safeguarding policy. So when I'm in KZN, I want to take my son or daughter to go and jump on a horse, there is a list I can scroll down. And when I'm just using lists of people, I'm just using people's names that I can see in this meeting. When I'm supposed to go to, I don't know, Deline, and I look there and there's no flippin' Deline, but there is a Catherine, well, then if I choose to go to Deline, because I can make that choice as a parent, I need to know that I carry the risk. Where if I chose to went to Catherine, what the hell is that? If I chose to go to Catherine, I know that SAF has done their due diligence because she is listed on the website. And so that is kind of the first thing that we need to be doing. Also at competitions, we need to be communicating that as far and wide as possible. We need to be saying to parents, guys, if you're using a coach that is not SAF accredited, you are carrying a risk here. And you need to be asking your coach, why the hell are you not gone and get done? So that's the first thing. That is the short stop. The long-term process is for us to get to a situation where when an athlete gets to a point that they can compete, that they are going to compete. So I now want to go to do, I don't know, Durban and districts or whatever the case may be competition. I want to go to that competition. When I register for that competition, a part of my registration criteria is that I have to list my coach. And if my coach isn't affiliated, I can't compete in a competition endorsed by SAEF or the province, etc., etc., etc. But that will be something that we will potentially get to down the line. And these aren't even conversations that I've had with Charlene yet. So I may even be completely out of line. But from the protection, so as the partner to SAEF, I certainly am comfortable to say that we do unquestionably need to create a place where a parent choosing a coach must realize that there are coaches that we have accredited and there's coaches that we haven't. The decision to use a person, free trade, you can use anybody to do anything, but we need to know that we're not at risk if you choose someone that we haven't endorsed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you spoke about culture. It was just a comment. But interestingly, the end game of the safeguarding of sports, and ultimately as this thing grows, is to create a place where there is a culture. Because when we were in Trinidad and when we were talking, that was the long-term goal for 7 to 10 years down the line, to make safeguarding a culture within all sports. Cost of clearances. So we will set up through Jared, we will set up clearance days in the various provinces around the country. You guys will say to us, as the provincial head, I'm going to use Durban again as an example. Listen, guys, we've got a thing happening in Hillcrest, and so all the coaches will be there, and we've arranged with the Guardian for their fingerprint technician to be there on the day. The coaches and whoever can go and get their clearances done. It'll take them 3 minutes to get their fingerprints captured, and the cost for the coaches is 250 Rand, and it's 250 Rand per for every 2 years, and that covers all 3 checks. They can go and do it themselves. If they wanted to, they can kind of make applications through the Registrar of Sexual Offences, go and deal with Department of Social Development and work through the SAPS. But just in terms of their kind of costs in that space, it's probably going to cost them about $170, other than the fact that it's going to cost them a whole lot of time to go stand in queues and get all of that done. So it does really make sense. And 250 Rand is significantly lower than what we charge in our school space. And the reason for that is because we really are wanting to break into the sport. Criminal check and suspension on that. So, excuse me. So just to be clear, there is no legislation, there is no law that says that if you have committed a criminal act, you can't work anywhere. There's nothing to say that at all. The only place where that gets driven is by policy. So as an example, an accounting firm may have a policy that says if you've got a previous conviction for fraud or theft or any dishonest crime, you can't work here. But that will be their internal policy. That's not legislated. There is legislation that says if your name is on the sex offenders register or on the child protection register, you may not be employed or volunteer in any capacity where you may come in contact with children. So that's done the crime. What's it? Done the time, done the whatever you said. That doesn't apply to those 2 registers. When we look at criminal, I think we do need to apply glasses to that. We need to be kind of very aware, much like you saying, if 20 years ago someone was at varsity and they smoked some weed versus last week someone, robbed a bank and there was an armed robbery, those are 2 very different crimes. And I think the policy aligns to that. So the policy is going to say that if you do have a previous conviction, the DSO will have final say in terms of whether or not it is acceptable or not. You asked about the video being placed on the website and being spread as far as possible. Honestly, if you guys have a website person or a communication person, we have many different safeguarding videos on our YouTube channel, and you are more than welcome to take the link for any of those and use them on your website. You're 100% right. The more we talk about it, the more we get the information out, the easier it is going to be. And then, okay, and then we answered the first one and the last one and the first thing. So I can't remember who asked those questions, but I hope that did answer what you were asking. There was someone else with a hand up. I'm going to assume that string of questions answered the question you wanted to ask. So yeah, I suppose opening it up again to everybody. Is there anybody that has any other questions that they would like to ask? Yebo, Rita.
Okay, so this also then applies to all athletes. It doesn't help the admin and the coaches is all certified. What about the athletes?
No, so we don't need to get athletes. So our objective is the safeguarding of the athlete. So the athlete doesn't have the ability to manipulate the relationship, because the athlete in the coach-athlete relationship doesn't have the power. So we will never be in a situation where an athlete won't choose the coach to be in the coaching team. However, the coach holds all the ability for the athlete to move forward, and so that coach can manipulate that. That's not to say that when we apply other legislation like sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior, grooming if it's underage, etc., all of those statutes 100% apply to any relationship. However, an athlete doesn't come to the federation, and because of the athlete, the federation can move forward. The athlete comes and then needs the federation to move forward, and the federation moves forward as a result of coaches, volunteers, administrators, etc. So if you volunteer or are employed or remunerated, or even if you work as a service provider to the federation, it applies to you. It doesn't apply to athletes. However, with that said, for both Tokyo last year and now for Commonwealth coming up next month, SASCOC are expecting all overage athletes to go through the same thing as coaches. But in terms of SASCOC policy and in terms of best safeguarding practice, that isn't standard practice. So if you chose at national level to do that in your policy, but it isn't standard. You know, if we're going to kind of tee off at the starting blocks and just grab all the lowest hanging fruit off the bat, my suggestion would be that we kind of maybe bump that out to potentially a policy for next year. I don't know, but I mean that's an internal decision to make. That I can tell you what the best practice is, but that's an internal call. That's not a me call.
In our sport, there's adults and children. There is athletes at the show. What if the person perpetrate this safeguarding issue is one of the adult athletes? What do we do then?
So what we need to do is we need to put policy and regulations in place that prevent that perpetrator from accessing that child. I think we must be very clear that when we look at somebody, and if we're talking about sexual assault, if we consider an adult who is going to sexually assault a child, let's give it that type of context, okay, then we need to bear in mind that the idea, and if I can say it like this, if I can say it very bluntly, the idea of gryp, rape, and escape is something that happens maybe 1%, maybe 2% of the time. I have personally chased pedophiles for 25 years. I have arrested probably 800 to 1,000 of them. I've worked with about 15,000 children that have been sexually assaulted, and I can tell you now that it happens. I've literally never done a case like that. I have done cases where there is a grooming process, there is a creating of a relationship, there is a trust factor that builds into the grooming. And so as a DSO and as the proactive safeguarding agent, it is our job to mitigate as far as possible the potential for that relationship to develop. And we can set criteria on those that are wanting to volunteer or work in our organization, but we can't force criteria on those that want to compete. We can say it, but if somebody goes, to hell with you, I'm not going to do it, well, you know, it is what it is. I think that we'd be pushing the envelope too far, but if it is something that you are seeing challenges, maybe we set policy that says adults and kids can't be together, adults and kids can't be on the same WhatsApp groups together. We can definitely do all of that, but checking if they've got previous convictions and all that kind of thing, it's not even there's not even law that could force us to do that. I mean, because where does it end? What about spectators? So yeah, it would be very difficult to enforce. That's not to say I wouldn't be happy to help you write the policy, but yeah, to enforce it would be close to impossible.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Good question, though, Rita. It's not the first time that's been asked, so it has been something that has challenged a lot of people. Is there any other questions that I could potentially answer before I talk into how I'd like to consider us moving forward in the rollout? Lekker, cool. Thanks, guys. Okay, so the next step or the next idea is that Jared will reach out to Rita tomorrow in terms of setting up possibly a meeting around how we can get some of that structure in, some of that information in, so we can build the safeguard profile for SAEF. I think that in that space there would be a need for Jared to potentially speak to some of the provincials about talking about who their DSOs are going to be, and really through those provincials talking to the districts and clubs within your provinces around who they would choose as DSOs and how we're going to move forward. To that end, we have very simply for this specific meeting, we have quite a significant Zoom license. So what Jared will do is through the provinces and obviously through the national DSO, let you know about the next info session, which will be very similar to this. And in that info session, we will invite any person that wants to join, any club chairperson, any person that the club feels might be the best person for their DSO. If prior to that meeting you want to disseminate the video on how to choose a DSO, very happy Jared will get that through to you. And then let's schedule that meeting. We want moms, dads, coaches, mentors, chaperones, medical staff, whoever is in the organization that may have a question or that may want to understand. We want to literally invite every single one of them. And then my suggestion is, even before that meeting, that Jared, through Rita and through the national office, define when we're going to run the DSO course and how that's all going to fit together. And then let's say to the clubs, listen, guys, the DSO course for SAEF is, for argument's sake, on the, 20th of February, July, or whatever, it doesn't matter what the date is. But that's when it's going to be. We need all of you to identify your DSO. If you're unable to identify the DSO or don't know what we're talking about, there's going to be an info session on such and such a date. But that's kind of how that should all play out. So yeah, that's kind of the rollout. Additionally, it would make sense if as your provinces, you have got provincial Facebook pages or you've got provincial newsletter structures to communicate as far and wide the partnership between SAF and Guardian. Just when Jared eventually does get to a point where he's speaking to club DSOs, he runs into the challenge sometimes where he's like, hey, I'm Jared from the Guardian, and the person goes, yes, we've heard about you. You're a newspaper in the UK, aren't you? So that can be a bit challenging for him. So we do want to kind of get to a place where we have made as far and as wide as possible the information that's getting out there, so we know how this thing is going to move forward. And it is extremely important that the provincial presidents, their exco, all buy into this and obviously support the national structure, and to that end drive it into their districts and cause their districts to drive it into their clubs. If you are a provincial head, of a province, and your province is extremely big, we're very happy to have the conversation with you independently, and we go, okay, we'll do your province on a specific night because there's just going to be so many people. Or we go, listen, Western Cape, I don't know what your biggest ones are. Western Cape, Gauteng, I don't know, KZN, I don't know. But we kind of go, let's do it over 2 nights because it's going to be too many people. But all of those plans will be made with Jared. And so to put that in a nutshell, there's 3 channels that we're going to move forward from out of this meeting. Number 1, for us to communicate as far and wide as possible the relationship between Guardian and SAEF. Number 2, identify when we're going to run the DSO course. And number 3, finalize and button down the last of that policy document. And I would believe that the communication will either come from Jared or it will come from the national office through to the provinces around how we're going to move forward and what those dates are going to be. And then in your own capacity as provinces, if you want to reach out to us directly, please feel free to do that. I know very often in sport there is a concern that if we reach out to a service provider, what is it going to cost us? If we need advice, how much is that going to cost us from a consulting perspective? I want to just be clear that in our relationship with SAEF, that is what we're here for. And so please don't be concerned about the cost. Rather pick up the phone and ask the questions. If there's going to be a cost, I will be very clear. I'm not worried about having that conversation. So if it's a situation of saying, listen, guys, to go down this specific road, like you want me to go to one of your clubs and investigate a rate that's played out, I'll be very clear. I'm happy to go, okay, for me to do that, these are the costs, this is the hourly cost. Do you want me to do it? But please don't not phone because you're concerned about money, because I don't know if I could sleep at night if I knew that there was someone that was at risk I could help, and the gateway between me getting there and the help that they needed was money. So that just really isn't the heart of the Guardian by any stretch of the imagination. So if you want to reach out to us, sport@theguardian.co.za. My email address personal is Mark with a C at The Guardian. Jared is Jared at The Guardian. Double R and 1D. So yeah, any other questions, guys? Anybody got any questions on the rollout? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Oh, sorry, the final thing, Jared will also need to know from the national office if over the next couple of months you have really busy competing times, like you got national champs coming up or something along those lines. We're obviously going to need to structure the rollouts around those times. And there are places where they're very beneficial, like we can get our fingerprint technicians there, and there are times where they also kind of slow it down a bit because we need to be hands off because there is a focus on the federation. Okay, Rita, is your hand still up or is it up again?
No.
Okay, cool.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody else have any other questions, or can we hand over to Charlene to close up?
Okay, it seems like Fiona has got a question.
And Jackie, yeah.
It's more of an observation than a question. We are dependent on a lot of volunteers in our sport. And I think that we somehow are going to have to not exclude them, but in terms of the compliance and getting the safeguarding in place, we're going to have to find a way to work around let's use an eventing show as a very good example, where we typically have over 60 volunteers at a show to help with jump judging, gate marshalling, and I'm not even including then the guys that are doing the catering or anything else like that. So your statement in the beginning, Mark, where you said that anyone who's involved in a club or an event or something needs to have the 6 checks. I don't know how we're going to do that. I'm not saying we won't. I just think it's going to be a challenge which is probably quite particular to our sport. We probably share it with the endurance guys. Enduro, when I talk about the motorbiking, although they don't need as many marshals as we do. So it's an observation. And also that a lot of our clubs actually don't have they have a field of play, which is a venue.
Yeah.
They don't actually have a clubhouse. And there's many of our clubs where the people involved in the clubs, I would never make them a DSO because it's not the type of person that you would want. They're not approachable, they're not reliable, so we are going to have some challenges. And for me, it's the volunteers. We have enough time getting enough volunteers to be able to do our events. The last thing we need to do is start chasing them away because we're making it impossible for them to help us. So that's just me. It's just an observation.
And I think it's extremely valid. I don't think it's just an observation. I think it could be a real challenging gateway for us to get there. And so I think we do need to consider that in terms of our strategic outlook. And if that means that, we start off by taking the lowest hanging fruit off the bat. We kind of go, okay, let's do coaches and let's do club execs. Let's start off there. And our first goal is between now and the next 3 months, this is what we're going to do, because these are the easy ones. Let's get these out the way. Then we kind of go, these were going to be medium challenging. And so we'll kind of look at addressing those maybe over the next 3 months. And then right at the end, we get to the point where, some of the federations, as an example, have volunteers and assistants that can't speak English. And so we then need to really sit down and go, okay, well, can we expect them to do a clearance, or can we expect them to do an SAC exam where they don't even understand the literature we're talking about? So we don't want to kind of put those obstacles in the way right now. Right now, we just take the lowest hanging fruit and get as far down the road as we can. And then at that point, there is a better understanding of where we're going, and the resistance is less, and we can really kind of talk into what is the best way forward. But I think it's an extremely, extremely valid point, and something that needs to be built into the planning as we move forward. Jackie?
Okay, I just want to go back to what Fiona's just said, because that is part of my thing. I mean, to now expect a volunteer that gives up their time, effort, and family time, etc., to come and volunteer for us, and then expect them to pay the 250 Rand to get all these clearances, I think we're going to say goodbye to a lot of volunteers. I personally have a millennium child who says I'm mad doing all this volunteering. So we've got to look at things a little differently, because that'll chase them away. If I wasn't in the position and I do a lot of volunteering, I would say, thank you very much, goodbye, I'm not spending that money. So it's something we've got to look at seriously, because 250 Rand in a lot of people's pockets is a hell of a lot of money right now.
I hear you. And Jackie, there's two sides to that coin, though, because the other side to the coin is, if you're a federation in a sport that's not going to be checks, and I'm wanting to get into a relationship, an inappropriate relationship with a child, and I can just volunteer and no one's going to check, yours is the federation I'm going to choose, or yours is the club I'm going to choose. And I realize that both of those are emotive arguments, one being we've got them as volunteers, how can we charge them? And the other side of it is, how can we not check them because we place children at risk? So I think we need to be more academic and go, let's realize that the swings in both directions, and what is the solution, as opposed to, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get involved here.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. I don't have a problem with that. What I'm saying is that the 250 Rand for a lot of people is just unaffordable right now.
I hear you. And if that is the biggest gateway, then let's find a way to get around that, because there are ways to get around that. We can, we've even spent time with some clubs in the really impoverished parts of South Africa, when we look at, for example, football, who is just a field and some trees, and run fundraising for them. Because for me, I want to know that when I go to bed tonight, kids are safe because I got up this morning. And something like money cannot be the obstacle to ensuring that those kids are safe. So if it means we have to have the conversation and our obstacle is money, then let's arrive at the table with the idea of going, we will find an answer. We don't know what it is yet, but we will find that answer.
Thank you.
That makes sense? You're welcome.
And the costs of the courses for the DSAs?
So the DSO, so the DSO course is, okay, so the SAC is easier to answer the question very simply because the SAC is $100, and it is an online course. So there sometimes are challenges there with volunteers who don't have access to that kind of technology, which we would need to talk about as well, if that is a challenge. But it's $100, and that's everything right through to certificates. The DSO course is a little more expensive in that it's a 2-day course. However, if we can get bulk, we can reduce the costs quite substantially. So let me explain what I mean by that. The 2-day or 3-night course is 1,750 Rand. However, if we take 1,750 Rand, let me rephrase that. If we divide 35,000 Rand by 20, we end up with 1,750 Rand. So 20 people would cost 35,000 Rand. However, even when we did the Tokyo or the Olympic team, we did 80 DSOs in one course. The top end price is 35,000. So now we're dividing that by 80 as opposed to by 20. And so the price is a quarter. So now we've got 1,750. Your price is now for a DSO course around 350 or 400 bucks. But those numbers we would need to kind of talk into. That's kind of how that all plays out. But now we're talking money, and Charlene's hand's gone up. So Charlene, yeah.
I just want to say to the presidents and the provincial DSOs that the SAF will be paying the fee for your course and for your SAC. So, and then we will discuss moving forward on the other points. I think, Mark, for starters, we must focus on the coaches and not the volunteers, but we have to look at the volunteers later and see how we can work around that to just make it work for the sport. But I think our focus in the beginning will be the coaches.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Jackie, is your hand up again or still up?
No, I'm trying to put it down. Thank you.
You're welcome, Deline.
That's amazing. I think this is the most amazing opportunity that has come our way for a very long time. And thank you, Sai, for paying for us. I do understand the lack of money, but 250 Rand is an entry into a dressage training show. I'm sure, guys, I don't want to be sounding like I'm against you, Jackie, or anything like that, and money is not an issue. But really, for the safety of our children and the safety of our athletes, I think that is not really money to pay. And if somebody wants to walk away because they don't want to go through this, find somebody else. I think this is the best opportunity we have seen in a long time in this country and in sport, where we know that things can go wrong. That is horrific. I mean, yeah, the stuff that we've seen, and let's protect our people against that at least. So thanks, Mark. Thanks, Saif.
Okay, thanks, Deline. Okay, does anybody else have any questions for me? Like I said, there will be correspondence going out via the national office and from our office. And if anybody wants to reach out to either Jared, myself, or to anybody in our sports safeguarding team, you can go with Sport at the Guardian, or Mark at the Guardian, Mark with a C, or Jared at the Guardian with a double R. Other than that, yeah, I'm not sure. Is that it? Are we done? Charlene, are you happy? Is there anything else you want me to address?
No, I think that's it, Mark. We will take it further, and we'll be in touch in terms of dates. We'll talk to Jared. I'll talk to Rita, and we'll move it on from there.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for the start.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining the session. Thanks, Rita.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. It was very informative.
You're welcome.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.